What continues to plague us is a mandatory spending system that is deeply out of balance and unsustainable. Ultimately, solving this problem will require a greater degree of political will than exists today, and I regret that. But when the time comes to do this, and it will because it must, the path ahead will be based upon the framework that we have laid out to solve this problem.
All right, Paul Ryan, in his final words as Speaker before he steps down and goes into private life. He's been in Congress. He's 48 now, one of the youngest speakers we've ever had in American history. Certainly the youngest to call it quits on his own and retire from Congress. So he's been there since he was 28 years old. So what does the future hold for him? It says something about the times we live in, when right after we were covering that on Fox Business Live, a lot of people were saying, well, good riddance. It's a cruel world out there. Fox News contributor Kat Timp. We've got Catalina Magazine publisher Kathy Abreu, National Taxpayers Union senior fellow Mattie Duppler. Mattie, you know, he knew when he took this job a few years ago the heat he'd get, and he acknowledged that. He acknowledged that, you know, the most crucial issue of our time, dealing with our debt and our spending that's out of control. Right. A pox on both parties, a pox on himself.
Well, I think that this criticism of Speaker Ryan is fully undue for a couple of reasons. One, if you recall, when Speaker Ryan became Speaker, he did so as an act of public service. He didn't want the job.
He did not want that job.
He would. I mean, it's a thankless job, as you mentioned before. Yeah. You get no credit for what you do try to accomplish while you're there. And he was the head of a conference that was extremely diverse and wanted a lot of different things from him. Now, the conversation about entitlements, spending, and debt would be absolutely different without Speaker Ryan. Without Chairman Ryan, as chairman of both the Budget and the Ways and Means Committee, he was able to offer leadership on those issues. We wouldn't even have the lexicon to talk about tackling these problems if we didn't have his leadership on these issues. I think for too often we look at full-scale, big-picture reforms without looking at what we need to get things done, and that's getting the inertia started in the right direction to begin with.
And he started that. And I give him credit. A young guy and all, but I remember distinctly when he was just trying to rein in, Kathy, the growth of Medicare. Forget about cutting it, just the growth.
Right, right.
And those famous ads that were put out that he was trying to push Granny off a cliff, who I thought at the time was a guy dressed up as an older woman, but the guy pushing her off the cliff was, in fact, supposed to be Paul Ryan. And that's what you get trying to control the growth of something.
Right, right. But I think his legacy is going to be the tax bill. It's the biggest tax legislation in 20 years. So we have to give him credit for that.
Do you give him credit for that?
I give him credit for unifying his party and having that pass. Yeah, he was able to do something that maybe someone else couldn't have pulled off. So he did unify the party. And actually, from what I heard on the ground, everyone likes him in Congress. I mean, the Democrats might not admit it, but he's a likable guy. And they will say he's talented.
He's a good human being,
Talented,
but he
original ideas.
Some of the stuff he's talking about, as much as you hope the two parties can get together and so maybe he saw a hint of that in this criminal justice legislation, maybe saw a hint of that to avoid, you know, the government shutting down on Friday. Maybe there are hints of it. What do you think, Kat?
I suppose there are hints of it, but you have to really want to look. He's talked a lot about, I've appreciated the way he's talked a lot about civility, and he's talked about tribal identity politics and how politics nowadays seems to be about hating something or hating the enemy rather than
What do you mean by that?
Rather than uniting around common values that we all share as Americans, which would be a great thing to get around. The criminal justice reform bill was an example of that, but those examples really are few and far between. There seems to be a lot more venom going all over the place in politics.
And I think back at a core, and we've all been down there, and you go to Washington, you realize these guys who scream and yell at each other right at the microphones are slapping each other's backs and joking with each other, and they don't loathe each other. And I think it goes back to that notion a lot of this is just for theater and effect.
Well, and Kat, I think you raised such a good point, which is that Paul Ryan has always been for something. He has not been the guy that you point to when you're looking for someone to be against something. He is always for something. He is for building a future that lasts, and that is why he took on entitlement spending as really his issue that he wanted to try and tackle.
But even Republicans abandoned him on that.
I would argue that Republicans are politicians, as are Democrats, and they are both parties are victims to the difficulties of the bias against reform in Washington. I think to Kathy's point, the fact that tax reform got done, the first transformational piece of tax reform in 31 years, that's generational.
But that was a one-party effort. The healthcare thing was a one-party effort, right? I mean, we're going to be doing legislation by one party from now on?
What's so interesting is with the legacy is you just read about it, and some people are saying, oh, this is great, the tax bill, it's wonderful, this is his legacy, but at the same time, then you have the Democrats saying it's awful, it's not going to work. And and this is the worst piece of legislation we've seen in so long that he did nothing.
It needn't be that way.
So,
you think we can ever get our act together?
I don't think so. Not anytime soon, unfortunately.
I
think that he really tried. He was someone who came in and started talking about the deficit, talking about the debt, and then during his time as Speaker, the deficit actually went up almost $350 billion. So I think, will be remembered as someone who really tried, but he couldn't actually pull it off.
All right. A general on what the president is thinking about doing in Syria or not doing right after this.